Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Chani Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now. Today, I am thrilled to have one of my favorite people join us. Her name is Jordan Heustis. She works in an academic library where she conducts research related to accessibility and disability justice, along with assisting medical researchers at the university. By evening, she is a podcast editor and assistant to Elise Wells. By later evening, she is a graduate student. And by night, she is an astrology student and practicing witch. While still honing in her astrological practice, she is passionate about exploring the ways the cosmos can offer insights into our lives, our gifts, and our challenges. You can follow Jordan on Instagram and TikTok at Your Witchy Librarian, or if you are interested in a natal chart reading, send her an email at yourwitchylibrarian@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to have all of that information in our show notes so you can easily reach out to Jordan or follow her however you wish. I am Chani, and I am with my co-host, Chloe.
Hi, I'm so excited.
We are
Jordan, we're so excited to have you here.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. We are dying to know how in the world you got into astrology. And let me just say this. A person I know who is a phenomenal astrologer and made a professional living at doing this for years and years, top-notch person, told me it took her 10 years to learn this practice. And when I heard 10 years, I said, good, I'm glad Jordan's doing that. And she's since retired. So you are being handed the torch, my dear. Please tell us how you chose to dive into something that is so incredibly time-consuming and complicated.
I got into my spiritual journey October 2023. And typically I'm the type of person who likes to hyperfixate on a skill for multiple years and master it. But I decided with this spiritual journey that I was going to let myself switch activities as frequently as I felt called to. And I did that for a few months, and it was good because I was touching on a bunch of different things, but also I wasn't getting that fulfillment of mastering something like I really like to. And so I had my first tarot reading with Elise, February 2024. And in it, one of the cards essentially said that you ground and center yourself by building skills. It was kind of like the permission I needed I can now stop switching all these skills, and I can just pick one spiritual skill and master it for a little bit. And so I was in between astrology or herbal studies, and I went with astrology because I thought it would be cheaper. It is not, but I thought it would be cheaper. And because I knew it would take up less space in my apartment than herbs, that's just how I chose astrology.
So it was a practical decision.
Yeah. Yeah, it was my living situation decided it for me.
Wow. Do you still dabble in herbalism?
I haven't yet, but I probably will, and maybe I'll connect the two.
That's powerful. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited for this interview. Okay.
So you were looking at astrology? Did it call to you? Were you always into looking at the skies, the stars? I mean, how did that practice in particular jump out to you?
Ooh, this is so interesting because I really loved that I thought it was going to be a practice that wouldn't require intuition. I was still pretty atheist at the time, getting into spirituality, so I wouldn't call myself an atheist at the time, but I had very little beliefs or understanding of spirit at that point. I liked that I could look at something concrete. If I could just decode the puzzle, that was it. But my guides are telling me something. I felt like it was written in front of me, and so I really liked how concrete I thought it was going to be. If I study enough, then I can just become the supreme at this.
So, what keeps you engaged now? Is it because of the intuitive component in addition to the skill building?
That has become exciting. I think I keep going. It's one of those, the more you know, the more you know that you don't know. I just didn't know how deep astrology could go. I think we've talked about this before in some of our group chats about like medical astrology. Like I didn't know that could be a thing. And I did start to kind of connect with my intuition. And that is something that I've actually kind of made it my business right now to study intuition in the birth chart and to see how our intuition shows up on our chart because I really want to connect more with mine. And so that's kind of been like my big research topic or passion in astrology these days has been researching how intuition shows up in our birth charts.
I always thought I was intuitive, but it wasn't until my 12th guess that I figured out that Jordan was a Gemini. But because of your birth chart, Jordan, and looking at the intuitive impact of the stars and planetary alignment, what have you come to realize about your abilities just based on that natal birth chart? And then how are you seeing that come to life as you build your astrology practice?
So I'm still diving into it. I have a Taurus moon, and in astrology, the moon is exalted in Taurus, which means essentially it's the best place for the moon to be. And so it's supposed to be a very intuitive, very, maybe not like leaning psychic placement, but I don't really resonate with that. And so I have another placement as well where my Neptune trines my sun, which should also be a psychic placement. And my sun's in my eighth house, and the Neptune's in the fourth house. So that can imply psychic abilities. And I felt like I have not connected with that as much. So it's also about how the planets are interacting with other planets. My moon is squaring my Uranus, which can mean that my intuition comes in at random times and shockingly. My moon is conjunct my Mercury. And I know that we've talked about this a bit where like maybe my intuition comes in just in my mind of just a knowing, of just an intelligence. It could also mean like I hear things or it's in my seventh house, which could imply that my intuition speaks more through other people. Maybe things people tell me are my hits. And I've kind of connected with that a little bit. If someone says something to me and weeks later I'm still thinking about that one sentence, I've learned that that's a hit for something. That was a message from somebody that was important.
I've heard you talk about how when you light one candle, it kind of lights another and then another.
Yes.
Could you kind of talk about that to us? Because every time you talk about this, I get mesmerized and I always have more questions.
Yeah, this visual gives me chills. This was told to me by Ocean Pleasant, who is a very modern astrologer. But she had told me that a birth chart is like 1,000 candles all in a circle. And if you light one, they will all light each other and everything lights up and buzzes. Something about that vision that connected with me so much that like if you can just connect to one part of your birth chart, you will start to connect to all of it. And I just thought that was so cool.
That's a beautiful vision.
Yeah.
And also, the visual actually just emanates the connections that we all have with each other, but also the connections between our mind, our body, our emotions, our spiritual selves. I really like that.
Yeah, I do too.
And I think you're right, Jordan, because claircognizance and clairaudience tend to be the two toughest clairs to validate because they do come in from a claircognizance standpoint as a knowing. And how do you say and prove how you know something. You just know. And from a clairaudience standpoint, if you're an avid reader, which I know you are,
Mhm.
you're reading and you're hearing the voices in your head as if you're reading a story, and you're so accustomed to hearing that in your head, why would you think that it's coming from anywhere else,
Mhm.
spirit guide or otherwise? I just have a feeling you probably are way more psychic or intuitive than you think you are, but because you tend to have the two toughest ones to validate and you're a skill builder, that it just makes it harder for you. But the readings that you've done for me and for others have been incredibly spiritually connective.
Yeah, and getting to read for you all really kind of opened my eyes that like, oh, this is a skill that is working kind of thing.
You read for us, and I, previous to meeting you, had actually paid for several astrology readings. And in short, the amount of information that you gave me, I remember my whole body was just in chills. I was in tears and I was like sobbing, messaging you. I'm like, how did you know all of this? Because it resonated in such a deep way. And it was something I hadn't really come to terms with my own self, and acknowledging it and allowing myself to grow through these things. And to have you, say all of it just right there, like, is it possible? I'm like, holy cow. And in simple black and white, you just blatantly asked, and it was the sweetest, kindest thing. And it just struck such a deep nerve. And you've done that over and over.
That chart reading with you was the first time that I didn't want to say something, but I felt intuitively that I had to say it. I was so scared. I haven't learned how to talk about things, I guess, yet. And so that was like one of the most validating experiences ever. That was really cool.
I'm so glad I could be a part of that. For sure, it was the other way around for me as well. That was so honest and kind and well delivered. So I am very surprised to hear you say that. And I think in the medical profession, they call that good bedside manner.
Oh my gosh, you have good star side manner. I love that. You know, Jordan, I don't know if you recall, but you had some tough things to say to me too. And I think it was around my Chiron, if I
I think
recall.
so, maybe.
And you had talked about some, I think you had phrased it like traumatic pain, wounding, and
Right,
loss.
Chiron. Yeah, Chiron is
Yeah.
trauma, awkwardness, guilt, sometimes fear or shame.
Yeah. And I was like, check, 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 check. You said it's awkward for you or uncomfortable for you. You're still learning how to share. There's not one person on the face of the earth that doesn't have some sort of trauma or pain.
Mhm.
And don't worry, if things are going really good for you now, they won't last. So, right? I mean, it's just true. So you can have the best life in the world, and then 10 minutes later, something traumatic happens. So the chances of your having to share some sort of trauma message is probably 99.9%. So how are you learning to say that in a way that is received in a caring way and not, seems like some things have happened to you, girl. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think my initial fear was bringing up. So I just felt like I didn't know if people wanted me to focus on the good part. If I'm not being paid, should I just focus on the pretty flowery parts? And then my biggest fear was being wrong, saying that you might, especially with Chloe, that you might have trauma around this thing and being wrong about it. That was a big fear at the time. And again, when I started this, I was still figuring out higher self and energy and spiritual stuff. And so they recommend before you look into birth charts that you put up your shields and you protect your energy. And I was kind of like, whatever. And something that was starting to happen that like totally makes sense, but I just wasn't preparing myself for it at all, was that I give somebody a big reading and then they trauma dump on me. And I say that lightly, like I opened the space for it, but I didn't realize that I was kind of opening the space for that. Everyone in the spiritual community, I feel like, identifies as an empath, and I do not. And so when everyone kind of would dump everything on me, I would just freeze and be like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. this is a lot of like, this is like some deep stuff, and I'm just watching cartoons. Like, I don't really know what to say to this. And so I had talked to Elise about it. I was like, how do you handle these situations? And she had kind of said, like, of course, like the shielding. I do think like I'm a compassionate, caring person, but she did kind of have to teach me, like, here are some really nice things that you can say to people. And I was like, that makes so much sense. In the moment, I just froze. Like, it's not that I don't know how to be nice. I think just all of that energy right there was overwhelming when I wasn't prepared for it. There have also been, this is another thing I haven't quite figured out how to handle. This has happened twice, but I'll tell one little story where I had read someone's chart and they completely misinterpreted what I had said. And I could tell, like, you can tell that they were looking for validation for something that I would not have wanted to validate. But I had read just a bunch of random stuff about her life and her birth chart, and she responded with like multi-paragraphs of, I knew that my parents never liked me. I knew that I needed to be saved by a man. I know that even though no one likes my husband, I know that he's my savior. I never responded. I had no idea what to say. So that's kind of a thing where, like, I'm learning that some people are coming to you really only open to hearing one thing, whether you say it or not. My reading had nothing to do with a husband or a partner. I don't even think it really had much to do with her parents. I have no idea how she picked up what she had picked up.
So our conversation really got me wondering, what was that specific conversation that you had so gracefully delivered the exact sentence? So I did a quick research and I'm reading right off of the message you sent me. And it says, I really appreciate you trusting me with this. And then you gave me 2 little cute blue heart emojis. I almost left the part out about your 5th house ruling children because it can be very touchy, especially for someone who I feel like is you, who wanted to have children but was unable to. However, I felt a little called to say it there at the end. That's so powerful, but so much exactly why your message is powerful to everyone else too, right? Because you said it kindly, you honored your intuition, you honored your training, you honored your skill set, and you were so kind and so patient with it. And even in that message, you talked about how you almost held back, but you listened to your intuition. At that time, you had no idea that I had had emergency hysterectomy and wanted all of these children, but couldn't have them. Your intuition told you all of that. And so my question with what you've already shared is that at the beginning, your understanding of intuition was that it was not really a part of the astrology. And tied with my second question, which is, how has that changed? But also, how has it allowed you, how have you recognized, I should say, the growth internally, personally, professionally, and has that affected you in every facet of your life?
I think back to that moment all the time because that, like I said, that really was like the first time that I could acknowledge, like, this is my intuition, and I listened to it, and it was valuable. That was the very first time that had ever happened. And I did almost ignore it because I was so uncomfortable with it. And it was so, like, as I'm writing out that whole thing, I knew that it could mean children, and I was like, but don't mention the children. And then I just like kept hearing, like, do it, do it, do it. But I was so nervous. And then I think it was like literally the last sentence. I was like, by the way, it might not mean anything, but it could also mean children. I think I said it like so nonchalantly, like I was like, whatever. And then for that to have worked, that kind of taught me like how much intuition could be used in astrology. And I think I have also, wanting to be an astrologer, I have booked astrology readings with a bunch of different astrologers so that I can kind of pick up on what I do and don't like from their styles. And I do feel like the intuition is what sets people apart because all of the houses, they have their specific meanings. But when you're reading for somebody, you really can't be that specific. As much as like I wanted astrologers to be, it's really hard to predict the specifics. I can really only tell you the general, and then you have to figure out how it applies to your life. And I feel like the intuition is what has and what will allow me to sift through the different meanings of the houses and get to the specifics at least a little bit farther, making it easier for that person to connect with. And then my favorite astrologer, her name is Candace Marie from Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. She definitely uses psychic intuition during her readings, and I have found her readings to be the most accurate. She's predicted things in my life that have happened. I've definitely made it my mission to continue connecting with my intuition. Because after you, Chloe, there was someone else too where there was a little something that I had said and it did totally hit. And I was like, this is working. This is a thing. Like, it's happening. And so just, I'm kind of like always chasing that. Like, I'm always trying to like listen for that intuition. And it's not what I thought it was. I always wanted intuition to hit me in my body. Like, I wanted to feel chills. And I've been told that as a Taurus moon, you should feel intuition in your body. But that doesn't really seem to happen for me. So I'm just also trying to be open to all the other ways intuition can come to you, such as a nagging to just say it, just say it.
It's definitely how it comes to me. So if you find a better way, please share.
Do you see this as a service to others? What's your approach?
It's interesting because I still do just identify as a student. I guess this is a service to sell. Because a few people have reached out to me saying like, I want to pay you for this reading. And I was like, oh my God. So it's got to be a service. And as far as the service it brings to other people, and I think that's why like I want to study more, because I feel like I've gotten to a good part of decoding the chart. I'm really comfortable with birth charts. But as far as the advice part of it, I haven't really figured that all out. I can say, here's something that I bet you struggle with. I don't know how to fix it, but have fun with this information. So that's something that I'm still working on. But yes, like I do think that this is a service, that it is a service to people, to a community. And, you know, I can only grow from here. I can only get better at this service.
I'm a firm believer, especially in the professional field. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing your resources. And sometimes at that moment, you could say, here's a card, or I know a few good people, or this might be what you could look into. Yeah, and you're so scholarly.
It's interesting you say that. And the astrology that I have enjoyed the most, Candace Marie, her style is very, I would say, scholarly. She's a deep researcher. So is Chris Brennan. He's known for his deep astrology dives in Hellenistic astrology. But they teach a lot while they talk about their charts. And some people like that. They use heavy astrology jargon. If you've never heard of astrology, it would be very hard to understand what they're saying. And a lot of other readers don't use a lot of astrology jargon. And I was afraid that people wouldn't like what I do because I do like to use jargon in mine. I like it when other people use jargon. I like when they kind of teach why astrology means what it means as they're talking about it. And now that I've had a few astrology readings with different kinds of people, I have kind of picked up on like, no, I do like it when they explain to me why something is what it is, or even just in a random YouTube video when they explain everything as they go. So I guess it's all scholarly.
It's your style, right? Everyone has their style, and there's a person and a client for everyone.
I've always been a good student, and good student meaning that the way that our school system is set up benefits me, not everybody, but it works for the way that I learn. And I learn really well by just memorizing things. And so that, you know, made me a great student. And then in astrology, you know, your level 1 courses are a lot of just memorizing what each sign means and what each house is. And that I'm phenomenal at. So now that I'm kind of like past level 1 and working into other stuff, it's more research heavy, which I do enjoy. Now the opinions have to come in more. Now it's all the astrology debates and figuring out which side I may or may not fall on, and then having to research the people that I know, how it does or doesn't show up in their charts. It is interesting how everything connects. And then, you know, in the US, most of us practice Western tropical astrology, but there are so many other versions of astrology around the world that I haven't even been able to dive into. But I would love to know how they all connect. And I think it's through the planets. I think they all must connect through the planetary bodies themselves, but the way that we use them and the way that we look at them are all different from each other. One example, in tropical astrology, your rising sign is based off of where the eastern horizon was when you were born, and it has to do with the equinoxes. The zodiac signs are kind of more metaphorical. We say Jupiter is in Gemini, but it's not actually passing. It may or may not actually be passing the Gemini constellation. I think it's Vedic astrology, they do literally refer to where the planet is in the constellations. We all do it a little bit differently. But we use, in tropical astrology, we use the zodiac signs more as archetypes and storytelling.
Yeah.
Not
sure.
literally where the planets are in the stars.
You mentioned the rising signs and the sun signs and the moon signs. Are those the big three? Is that
Those are the big three. Yeah.
Okay, so can
Sun,
you
moon, and
just give
rising.
us the Cliff's Notes on why the big three are so important? And is that something that is just specific to, as you mentioned, our Western viewpoint of astrology, or do the other techniques look at that as well?
I'm pretty sure the other techniques that I know would look at these three. I'm not 100% sure what weight they give to each one. I will say, when we talk about horoscopes, it is kind of a known thing. That's referred to as pop astrology. I believe it was like the 1930s, and there was a woman who had a column in the news, and she used sun astrology because everybody can easily look up their sun sign, but not everybody knew their moon and rising sign. So everybody learned their horoscopes based off of their sun sign, but that doesn't really predict anything, simply your sun sign. Your sun is your life force, it's your vitality, it is your creative expression. It can also be referred to as like your soul's version of reality. The moon is your inner private world. The moon is your body. The moon is your emotions and your feelings. And then the rising sign is really what sets up your chart. And the rising sign is kind of more of your personality. They also say that if your sun sign is blue, the rising sign determines the shade of blue. And I don't totally subscribe to that, because I do think that the sun and moon are way more equal than people make them out to be. I do think that they are pretty balanced, but we just all know our sun sign. It's much easier in a newspaper to look up your sun sign than your moon or rising sign. And then going on with that, with your rising sign determines your chart ruler. That chart ruler in your chart will show you where you're being guided to. So those are the first three, I guess, and a half things that I look for in a chart are your rising sign, your chart ruler, where that is in your chart, and then where your sun and moon are.
So, through your experiences and lessons and interactions academically and through your peers and readings, outside of the obvious three and a half that you discussed, what's your knee jerk that you go to that you love to look at that just speak to you? And does it speak to you on everybody's, or does it change? Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah, when I first see a chart, I mean, I want to say in like 20 seconds, I kind of like boom, 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 looking at each little planet and what it means. Jupiter in your chart will show you like where you have major opportunities for growth and expansion, where you have good luck and fortune. So that's something that I look for first. Saturn can show you where you really struggle, where your challenges are. And then I hate to say this, but it's also kind of like, I like the drama in a chart. I like to see like, oh, like what does this person struggle with? And like, so I do look to Chiron. I'm like, what's their trauma? So Chiron, then I will look to Mars and Venus. Usually I need more context to understand the Mars and Venus. So Saturn and Jupiter. In astrology, you have the benefics and the malefics. The benefics are the quote, like the good planets, and the malefics are the bad planets. There is a whole debate about whether they should be referred to as good or bad. That's a whole thing. But for simplicity, malefic is bad, benefic is good. And then you have the greater of the two and you have the lesser of the two. So Jupiter is the greater benefic and Saturn is the greater malefic. Venus is the lesser benefic, so it's good, but not as good as Jupiter. And then you have the lesser malefic, which is Mars. And then there's a whole thing where you can go into sect, which has to do with whether you were born during the day and the night, and that can change who the greater malefic is or greater benefic is in your chart. But generally, Saturn is a greater malefic, Jupiter is a greater benefic. So Venus and Mars, I typically need more context to understand. And then your midheaven is where you can see their career. So I'll probably look there. And then if I know that they're married or something, I'll see if I can see their partner in their chart.
Do you feel like you know the person a little better, whether you knew them in real life or not, when you're looking at this chart?
I've started to. It definitely at first was kind of like I don't really know if what I'm seeing is true, but the more that I've done it, the more I've kind of really understood like the intimacy of getting to see someone's chart and like the trust that has to go into that. I can't confirm it unless I talk to them, but I can have a really good idea of like, this is where this person is really self-conscious, or this is where they don't believe in themselves, or this is like their relationship with their parents. This is their struggles with money. This is their struggles with their body. You know, they're not telling me face to face, but I can see it. What do I do with that information? Which most of the time, like, it is kind of, unless they ask me, it's just kind of, continue treating them like I was before I saw their chart. But it is such an intimate experience to look at someone's chart.
So, if someone was having poor body image, how would you see that on a chart?
There's many different ways you could see that. Chiron is a big one. If you have Chiron in the first house, if you have Chiron conjunct your moon, or interacting with maybe squaring your moon, like if you have Chiron interacting with your moon in any way, those will probably be the two big things that would tell me that they might struggle with body issues.
Gosh, I never knew it could be that personal. That's amazing.
I know.
That's really amazing. And when you were talking about the big three, having a bachelor's in psychology, to me, it sounded like the id, the ego, and the superego between the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. So again, the interconnection of all of these different theories and approaches makes itself known. What does your family think of your delving into astrology? Are they supportive? I know you had mentioned between us, because we're friendly, obviously outside of podcasts, that you had grown up with a Wiccan parent. So is this considered just an acceptable part of that type of spiritual life?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So my mom is Wiccan, and she did not raise me Wiccan, but she is Wiccan. My grandma is very new agey. I think she would call herself witchy, but she's not really, she doesn't really care for a label or anything like that. When I told my mom that I was getting into witchy stuff, she was like, finally, like, yes, the next generation. And my grandma, it's kind of gone a little bit far because she'll message me. Oh, gosh, I love my grandma. I love her so much. She's so great. She's also very boy crazy. And so she will message me and be like, am I going to meet someone on this trip? Like, what's my love life look like? And I'm like, Grandma, I don't want to talk about this. But she will message me and she'll be like, Jordan, should I leave my job? What do you think? Can you look at my chart? And I'm like, I am a child. Like, what do you mean? I can't tell you this, Grandma.
It's funny how traditional religions, the mom or the dad will say, oh, my son's going to be a priest. And your mom is like, oh, thank God, she's carrying on the witchy ways.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. So what do you do with your grandma's love life?
Gosh.
Are you impactful in her meeting boys? And what is your strategy there, Jordan?
So she loves to travel a lot. So she will ask me like, does it look like I'm gonna meet someone on this trip? And I mean, sometimes I'll just be like, I don't usually go deep into it. I'll kind of be like, yeah or no. I've talked a lot with her about her career and her chart, and we've had in-depth conversations about that. But the boy stuff is kind of awkward to talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, we're having fun talking about because it's your grandma. So, of course, you feel a way about that.
Yeah.
But there are, just like we were saying earlier, I mean, there are kinds of awkward discussions to have with someone, especially in your family, where you may not necessarily want to address what someone's sex life looks like, or, whether...
Yep.
Or whether even more personal. I'm struggling to find things that potentially are more personal than that. But I can totally understand how you're having that type of information would be attractive to anyone. I mean, I have personally stopped myself from texting you and saying, yo, Jordan, I got a question. I just received this email from somebody, and I would really like to get your birth chart input on this.
And I think that's another thing, and someone else pointed this out to me, that I really enjoy about astrology as far as like a divination method. And when I first got into it, it didn't feel like divination to me. But as I've gotten a little bit more into it, it does have a different kind of like concreteness that I enjoy that, like, for example, like tarot does not. And I still do enjoy tarot, and it has its time and place in my life. But I do really like that in astrology, I feel like a lot of times I can clearly see yes or no, or maybe, or like I can explain a little bit more than that. And I enjoy that in astrology.
Yeah, that's a good point because to your point with tarot, we know what the cards mean, but now you're in a position of having to interpret that and figure out how that actually applies to the specific question, to the
Yeah.
person. What is the difference between modern astrology and not modern astrology? And are we in the time of modern astrology? Or I remember Elise talking about having contemporary witchcraft being more indicative of a present time period. How does that work in astrology?
Yeah, traditional astrology, the way that I look at it, would refer more so to just ancient astrology. Often in Western tropical astrology will often tie to Hellenistic astrology. I think modern refers to 1900 to 1950s onward. I think of that start of the sun sign astrology as the start of modern astrology. The biggest difference that I notice is that there's different ways to read the house sign, the house system. There's whole sign houses and there's Placidus. And more traditional people will use whole sign, and more modern people tend to use Placidus. Placidus is more psychological, and whole sign is more predictive.
So when you say psychological, you mean looking at how things line up and then delving into the inner meaning.
Yeah, I would say Placidus allows for more influence from other signs in one area of life. It can also put different planets in different houses, which can completely change the chart. I started on Placidus. A lot of people today start reading on Placidus and then either they stay on Placidus or they move over to whole sign. I will say, while I have been practicing more whole sign these days, that astrologer that I love so much, Candace Marie, she practices with Placidus. She does a really great job at blending traditional with modern because she will still take a look at whole sign. She still finds validity in both. She does definitely lean more Placidus, though. She uses Placidus more often. So even though I'm studying with whole sign, I still find her with Placidus to be the most accurate I've come across. But Chris Brennan, who is known, I mean, he's probably like the astrology guy on the internet. He's a whole sign reader. So I would say Placidus versus whole sign is the number one debate in tropical Western astrology.
Could you talk to, or could you speak about the power of choice when it comes to predictive astrology?
One of the first things that kind of like validated astrology for me was seeing where my trauma shows up in my chart. And while it doesn't fix anything and it hasn't really like changed my life in that way, it was kind of validating to see it in my chart and that it was kind of a fated event. And that feeling of like, well, there was nothing I mean, I knew that there was nothing I could do. I was like 17. But that there was nothing that I could have done, nothing anyone else could have done, like it was meant to happen. However, I'm supposed to get through this. It is validated that I was supposed to go through this, that like my higher self has a plan.
I think you are on a shooting star, honestly.
That's so cute.
Yeah. And that's just a little astrology pun too, as I'm sure you've picked up. What software do you recommend people use if they're looking to play around with astrology as just amateurs and just having interest in it?
Astro.com. It is totally free. You can look at all the charts. There's ephemerises. It's super easy to use. Chani app. They do a really great dive into different parts of your chart, and then you'll get notifications that are like, oh, the moon is trining your Mercury, and like a one sentence of like what that could mean. So that's really great if you just kind of want to dive in a little bit and get like started into it. It's a really great way to become aware of planetary movements.
Personally, that app has really allowed me to connect. So when it uses those big fancy words that I don't understand, But what I did recognize is, okay, when it tells me this fancy word, today I'm feeling blank, and I'll just jot down, just a simple couple words.
Mhm.
And then the next time it comes up, I'm noticing patterns. And I did not do this paid subscription. I did the free version when you recommended it. So I think I've been doing it now, gosh, for at least 3, 4, 5 months now, something like that. But I absolutely love it.
I do love that, like, we all have our own skills and sort of like what we bring to the table. And then just in general and in life, but then also to the spiritual world, like we all have something that we offer. And Chloe, you have such a sweet presence, such a comforting presence. And then we've said this before, but like whenever you speak, I'm like honed in. I'm like, what does Chloe have to say? What psychic message is coming through? The way that you speak, which again, I rarely feel things in my body the way that I want to, but I've gotten chills when you've spoken before. So I just love that, we all have our little thing.
When will you consider yourself an astrologer?
I thought it would be when I get my certification, which you don't need to be certified in astrology to practice. That's, obviously not a requirement. As I've gotten to the point that several people have reached out to me for readings, I feel like it's got to be soon. It's got to be soon that I will like full on. What do I say now? I guess I say I'm a person who practices astrology. I say I'm an astrology student, and that will never go away. I will always be those things. I don't know. Maybe when I first make a website, that'll be like I'm an astrologer.
Doctors are practicing.
So the website will be your coming out party. You will officially recognize yourself as an astrologer.
That'll be fun. That'll be a good day.
I think, too, those of us who look to your expertise and your ability to weave your skills into a story that makes sense to us, you are an astrologer. I have asked Jordan to read a number of folks because I would like to give
My first client.
I would like to give those as gifts to people who often don't see the gifts in themselves. And I think Jordan is the perfect person to highlight that.
And that has so much changed the game for me because this will be like my first paid experience. And since then, like I said, you were the first one, but since then, several people have reached out to me and said, can I pay you for a reading? Can we pay to talk about this thing? So I'm real, and that, has all kind of started to happen recently. So I am definitely like in a place of like, well, what's next for me? Like, what should the next step be? I do have like my own other career. So like my plan has never been to be a full-time astrologer. What should I do to pick this up as a side gig? Or will it eventually become a full-time thing? Who knows? Only the charts will know.
What do you think is the biggest myth or misconception around astrology as a practice?
Well, probably the one that I've had to work through, feeling like if the astrologer does not predict the specifics in my life, then it's not real. I so badly, like, especially at the beginning of all this, because I was practicing astrology, I was studying it before I even would tell you that I believed in it. I wanted to be convinced that it was real, and I would have readings, and I was just kind of like, but then as I've read for other people, and we've talked about this, where I can tell that they're just so much more open to things than I've ever been, and you can see that they're getting more out of the reading because they're participating so much more into it. Whereas when I first started getting readings, I wanted to sit there for an hour and pretty much not say a word. And, I'm still, as kind as I can be during it, but I wanted to spend the hour being told and predicted what my life was like. I guess the biggest myth being that an astrologer can really predict the story of your life with such specifics. In reality, the prediction is more generalized. And then, like I said earlier, you have to apply it to your life. And if you do apply it to your life and you give that information to the astrologer, they can take it further into your chart and they can tell you more information based off of what you said. The myth being that an astrologer can be so specific, and then word of advice, the more you communicate with your astrologer, the more you're going to get out of it.
This is a valuable tool, whether you use it once, twice, a dozen times, the rest of your life. And if you're truly open to it, it could give you the tools to help with the ebbs and flows of life.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think I would maybe compare it to like a therapist where like if you did just sit there for an hour with your therapist and said nothing, like you really would not grow at all and you would get nothing from that session. I definitely had the mentality, I'm paying you for your expertise and knowledge and information, and so I want you to speak for all 60 minutes of this. But just like in a therapy session, if you did that, even though you are still paying for their education and their services and their expertise, if you didn't participate in it, you would get much, much less from it.
Yeah, I think that is a perfect metaphor for anyone who is seeking some sort of energetic read, whether it's astrology, whether it's mediumship, whether it's tarot, tea leaves, whatever. The more that you become open energetically to the conversation, the more it's going to flow. So you have been dabbling a bit into witchcraft. I would like to know a little bit about what interests you in witchcraft and whether you will consider yourself an astrology witch. If you do, what exactly that means.
Yeah. So, like I said, my mom is Wiccan. So I grew up like knowing about witchcraft. And like that was all kind of a normal thing to me. But I was atheist. I was very, if it can't be written in an academic journal, then I'm not interested in considering it. And then it was December 2021. I was 23, living in Baltimore City, and my cat suddenly died. I didn't consider that my cat could even die. I thought cats lived to be 30 years. I don't know why I thought that because I have grown up with cats. For some reason, I was like, this cat will be here till I'm 50. But she was only 4, and I had only had her for a year and a half. And it was so sudden. When she died, I got really depressed. And so I got, this idea, like, let me go on those stupid little nature walks and see if it cures my depression. And it kind of did. After that, I had like a string of really good luck, like amazing luck. Like I got a check for $4,000 in the mail when our car was breaking down. Even though I don't believe in any kind of divinity, this feels like it can't be random. And because my mother is a nature worshiper, I was aware that that was a thing. And given that these nature walks had been doing so much for me, it just kind of felt like that was like the easiest transition because this is what I knew of. So that is how I got into spirituality and witchcraft. As far as astrology witch, I would never like say I'm an astrology witch. I guess if you asked me, are you an astrology witch? I'd be like, I guess. In my day-to-day life, I wouldn't use such a specific label like that. I would say that I am a witch, but I still identify more with the word witchy than witch, which I learned recently is a whole debate. I would also say I'm very witchy. I would never on my own say I'm an astrology witch, but I guess I am.
So, what do you think, in your perspective, is the difference between being witchy and being a witch?
I think being a witch is a lot more like standing in it, a lot more like I know what I'm talking about when I say that I'm a witch and that I practice that, like being a witch is woven into everything that I do. And I don't really think that I'm completely there yet in where it's woven into everything that I do. And I would say I'm witchy too because given that my mom is Wiccan, and I know that this isn't true, but given that my mom is Wiccan, I did kind of grow up with the understanding that Wiccan and witch were synonymous words. And so as I don't identify as Wiccan, I feel like Wiccan is the same thing as a witch. So if I'm not Wiccan, then I'm not totally a witch. And I know that's not true, but I still kind of see the words as very similar. So I guess I say witchy because I feel like it allows me to explore other things that may not be Wiccan, or even pagan. I was really in the closet about it, and I've kind of come out slowly, and I'm okay with that. I think that's a perfect process. So I would say if someone came to me today and said, "Are you a witch?" Depending on who they are, I might still say yes at this point. But for a while, I wouldn't have said yes because I was very much in the broom closet.
Because you were worried about the response that you would receive, or them looking at you maybe differently at work because you are an academician?
This has a lot to do with how I view myself and that I have always been an academic and, like I said, a very logic-brained person. And I always respected religion and spirituality and what it could bring for people, but I definitely felt a little bit of like everybody else is easily tricked and I'm not. And so I felt like if I started to identify with any kind of spirituality, and it has been, it's a complete identity shift. I'm like not who I was, a couple of years ago, where like again, if it couldn't be in a scientific journal, then I wasn't going to consider it. Like that is so different from where I'm at now. And so I didn't want to talk about it for a while because what if it was just a phase? And I didn't want to tell people like, by the way, now I no longer align with all those things I've always said. And then a few months later be like, actually, no, I still do. So that was part of it. And then like kind of like my own ego as far as, I never would have consciously said this out loud. I don't think I would have consciously acknowledged this. It's more of my mind, I guess, but I still do. I still feel like I'm a very intelligent person. I'm a smart person. And I felt like religion or spirituality somehow made you less smart. And so given that I felt that way about other people when I was younger, I think that had a lot to do with how I felt about myself considering spirituality. So it took some time for me to get to a point where I got over that, I guess.
Wow, what a process you
I
went
know
through.
it's hard to talk about. I feel it's one of those things that like I'm not proud of. And I know I can't be the only one who's ever gone through that. So like I'm happy to talk about it, but it's such an uncomfortable thing to talk about because I guess I was so judgy. And I wouldn't have noticed that I was judgy, but
But I
yeah.
think it's a typical response of people who are academic, who are evidence-based. When I do regressions, I have people that tell me, I believe in science. This is not going to work. And I say, I understand that. And I respect that. I respect that opinion because I believe in science too. But if you notice, I said, I believe. So then
Yeah.
I think about that too. So I think eventually we come to the conclusion, which is what I think you're saying, Jordan, is they're not mutually exclusive. You can believe in both.
One thing that has been really exciting for me and validating, I work at a graduate school, it's a medical school, it's a big university, and finding other spiritual people in this academic world has been so exciting. I know lots of people, I say lots, I know a few people who have zodiac signs tattooed on their body, and I don't know if it was more of like a trendy thing, but like it's there. I know in one of the groups that we were all in, someone else in the group that I had never been connected with before actually works in my building. And that was like insane. We have a new person who started, and I was her buddy, which means that like I tour her around the building and around the city and all that. And she tells me that she gets tarot readings every month. And I have another coworker who was kind of like me, where she was very atheist, but she's been considering spirituality. And she's was asking me for recommendations on a psychic. And then I think the other thing is that in the US, like so many people are Christian. Even in the science field, so many people are Christian. And we accept that. But not always other, and I never did. Like I have always thought like Christian and spirituality are all kind of equal things. I felt like, none of those are scientific. But there are lots of Christian scientists, and how is that any different from some other kind of spiritual scientist?
That's an interesting perspective, and I appreciate that that's awkward for you, but I appreciate your sharing that with us
Yeah.
because it is, I can see your perspective of feeling like you're divulging something that may sound judgy, but I think a lot of people feel that way, or the converse, being Christian or and looking at spirituality that's not Christian as being something less than or something that maybe people who aren't in tune or smart would believe.
Yeah, for sure.
We would love it, Jordan, if you would leave us with an invocation or affirmation to leave our listeners as they are on their spiritual search, whether it's they're looking through astrology or another type of practice.
This affirmation that I came up with has to do a lot with me connecting with my intuition through charts. And so the first part of this affirmation has to do specifically with looking at charts, but you can omit this part if you are not interested in the charts. But the affirmation is, as I explore my chart, I unlock the intuition that empowers me to align with my true self. And as far as connecting with astrology yourself, I think one thing that I have found with astrology is that no one is ever going to know my chart the way that I do. No matter how many people that I pay to read my chart and tell me about my chart, no one is going to be as specific in my story as I can be. And so if you are interested in the journey that is astrology, you will get the most benefit from astrology being an astrologer versus being an astrology client. And both are valuable. Not everybody can be an astrologer because we need people to be doing everything else. But it'd be really beneficial for you to become intimate with your own chart and seeing what's laid out for you.
I love that. Jordan, one of the things you suggested to me was studying the planets itself is a great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. The first place to start is definitely the planets. I know a lot of people start with the signs, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I would say in a chart, the first thing you look at is the planets. And the planets are the ones that are moving. And I think the planets are also kind of like another language. And as I've learned astrology, I've started to get intuitive hits through the symbols of planets. And it's kind of become like an unlocked language that allows me to connect with spirit. Yeah, I would definitely start by connecting with the planets.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was so fun.
Thank you for joining the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast. Constructive and positive feedback are always welcome. Drop us some fan mail at mysticalmermaidlounge@buzzsprout.com or email us directly at mysticalmermaidlounge@yahoo.com. Finally, we do not accept sponsorships or ads so that we may bring a less distracting message to our listeners. So, if you are just as passionate as we are about educating and supporting spiritual seekers, then please brew some tea or Joe and pour us a cup at buymeacoffee.com/Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Thanks again and catch us at the next high tide. Bye-bye.